Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And Joel, you invited along a friend of yours to join us. So we're actually getting to do something on a Tuesday that we don't normally get to do. We get to have three energies all focusing on microphones at the same time. So Jenny Tuggle, thank you for joining us on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And given our topic this evening, I thought I'd bring a little ambiance. We have the fire in the background and the Christmas tree. I'm drinking peppermint tea. So
wow, beautiful. Yeah, I love it. I mean, well, 99% of our listeners are audio only, so we'll just have to promise them, yeah, it's a beautiful scene in the background. There's a fire in the fireplace. There's the Christmas tree. I mean, it looks very Norman Rockwell going on in the background.
Thank you. Yes.
Really, and really since 99% of our audience is on, so do I. I have the exact same setup behind me.
Yes.
Equally as pretty. I'm just letting you know for our audience that are listening right now. So imagine the same scenario.
Meanwhile, the other 0.1% are shaking their heads with their palms on their foreheads saying, oh, no, he's doing it again.
I'll never believe Joel again.
Never believe him again. No.
Yeah.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And actually, this is kind of a good way to start the conversation today because we're going to be talking about the 5 love languages as originally defined by Gary Chapman in his 1995 book, I think it was. And I honestly, this all came out of a post that Joel had that Jen responded to. And I want to go to you first, Jen, because you wrote a very interesting response. What motivated you? First, tell people what the response was, but then what motivated you to write that? Because it was a really interesting thing you wrote.
Well, thank you. Let's hope I can remember what I wrote. So I just remember reading this book when I was a teenager. And interesting enough, I've kept a journal for most of my life. And so I have reflected upon this book throughout different seasons of my life. And my love languages have changed, but I've thought a lot about the concepts that are in the book. I take issue with some things that are in the book as well, but I've just learned along the way that it's not just one way. So I think that it's kind of a complex thing. I think that you have a way that you prefer to receive love or what makes you feel loved, but also we also have a way that we show love to others. And those two things may not be the same. So really kind of some self-reflection and knowing yourself and how you show love and then how you would like to receive love or what makes you feel loved.
Yeah. I think you summarized it well. And in fact, if I remember correctly, you and Joel kind of went back and forth about the idea that it isn't just about a primary relationship, a marriage or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. It's about all of our relationships.
It is. For sure.
One of the things that really hit me, and while it hit me a little, what Jenny's response hit me with was, I only think of my love languages in giving. I never consider my own, and that's something that probably tells you a lot. It's like I give. I'm a giver of gifts. I compliment people. I do a lot of things, and so anytime I've ever really talked about that question, it's always been filtered through me, showing love, and I have never really, and I don't know why didn't hit home until that post was there. I just don't filter it because I don't care about gifts. I don't like to be hugged. I mean, it's like, so I have, and it's probably having, a pretty traumatic childhood and a lot of the stuff that I've been through that probably comes from that. I would assume we wouldn't need Freud here to really diagnose that today. But I do believe that, as I was, that's why this show excited me so much today because I continue to do work on myself, and that's an area that I need to really be able to look at it too, because that's always been about, well, how do I show love? So the love language, I read the book as what is about me giving love. There was never a moment of me evaluating what I like to receive in love, and that's sort of the point of the book. So I totally messed up the point of the book.
Hey, we can always count on Joel to find a new way to mess things up, and that makes it all very interesting, really, in the final analysis. Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I'm thinking about here is this whole thing about giving love versus receiving love. I'm reminded of a story that another former co-host of mine, Jen, her name is Cindy Chavez, once told here on the show about how she had her own issues in terms of receiving love. And the story was she was taken out to lunch by a friend of hers, and they had lunch, had a great time, and so forth. And at the end of lunch, her friend reached for the check, and Cindy said, "Oh, no, I've got that." And her friend says, no, I've got that. And Cindy realized that she was not allowing her friend to give her a gift that she wanted to give her. I mean, and that was a pretty big deal for both of them, actually, because Cindy realized this is a long-standing pattern. She had known she had issues of being a people pleaser and that kind of a thing, but she didn't realize how far away. It actually went to the point where she wasn't even allowing herself to receive love. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, and that's kind of what you were driving at in your comment, I think.
It's tough, and for me, again, you hit me pretty much between the eyes. Nobody pays the check but me. That's that's it. I pay the check. It's just
that's the rule. Okay,
that's the rule. I just don't. I'm probably. I can't imagine the last time somebody else paid the check. I always pay the check.
I saw an
and
interesting.
I'm glad to do it. I love to do it.
I know you do. Yes.
Yeah. And I tip ridiculously well too. On top of that, so.
Well, I think that goes along with your gift giving. I mean, that is your love language.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it makes sense. Walt went up. No, I'm going outside. That got weird for me for a second. I lost you guys, but you're back.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of funny signaling going on here. Yeah, we see you. We hear you. Yeah. Do you hear us?
Okay. Yeah, I do. I lost you both for just a second. But we're good. Yeah. So that's what was so intriguing. Yeah, that was what was so intriguing about this conversation we were having. And I was like, that's making me think of things a little differently, which is cool. I love to look at things differently.
Yeah. I saw an article somewhere online. I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was a survey that was done of one of the dating apps. And they were looking, I guess they were using a computer algorithm to sort through all the different profiles and so forth. And I know it was on Hinge. It was the Hinge dating service. And Hinge apparently was doing some internal tracking. That's what it was. And they were tracking how often people in their profiles and in their communications with each other were referring to love languages. And they discovered a very interesting fact, and that was that among men, let's see, how do they phrase it? Maybe I'm turning it around the wrong way. Among women who actually referred to receiving gifts on their profile, I think they had like 5 times more likely that men were going to like their profiles. But women were only about 12% likely to say that their love language was receiving gifts. A little bit of a disconnect going on there.
Which isn't shocking. Yeah.
So this whole idea of giving versus receiving is actually a pretty big deal.
It is. And I have a very good friend in my life. And it's going to sound like I'm talking about Joel because Joel has shared that gift giving is his, but it's actually someone else who was constantly giving me gifts. And I actually sat down with him one time and said, why are you doing this? Like, help me understand why you're doing this. Cause I didn't want them. I don't want them. So we had to have a conversation about that. And it was a very interesting conversation. It was a long conversation, but it kind of came back his childhood. He had nothing. And so now he has the means to be able to bless other people. And so that was why he was doing that. And when he explained it to me, that makes sense. But until we had that conversation, it almost was like, it's too much. It's making me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's good. And I'm glad you had that conversation because he was, that meant so much to him. And you're sitting there going, okay, where's this going? And, and it has to, and I think that's on a general level in relationships or, one of the things I do with employees and, of companies that I'm involved with and, with employees, I always try to figure out what their love language is, just to communicate. Just what matters. I have one of the companies I'm involved with. There's a lady. She was really good at her job, but she was just very grumpy, and nobody liked her. But she was really good at her job, and I would listen to her, and you'd ask her, how you doing? I gave her a raise. I gave her a couple whatever, some little bit of bump in position and all this other stuff. And she'd be like, thank you, but never got nice. But I would hear her talk about her grandkids to other people. So I started asking about her grandkids, and her grandson broke his leg. And I heard her say that. And I said, I want you to get your stuff together. I want you to go to the hospital and spend until he gets out of the hospital. You're not coming back. I want to make sure he's okay and you're there with him. First of all, I thought that was a good thing to do. But the moment I did that, I found her language. And after that, she became the most loyal. Every time, whatever I need is always taken care of immediately. And that I'm not doing to be manipulative. I wanted to make that connection. She is so valuable, but it was just such a disconnect from the value she was bringing and the way she was sort of operating. But it changed everything to find that one area that meant something to her. So these concepts, everybody has a different currency as well as love language. It's a similar type thing, but what matters to you is where we put the energy. Once you get that done, that's where communication in business gets really well. When you can really grasp what the other one's really into.
That's a really interesting example right there for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that Chapman in his book identifies 5 love languages, which I believe are quality time, acts of service, gifts, touch, and words of affirmation. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I find fascinating about that is that seems to be the composite whole that covers all areas, at least according to the theory as expressed in the book. But what you just expressed, Joel, doesn't seem to fit any one of those perfectly. And I like that because what it says to me is you have to kind of adapt what Chapman wrote in his book to reality and not try to do it the other way around.
Well, if something also, Walt, something that I do when I use this concept of working with clients, or I never really talk about this on Facebook. There's unlimited love languages. He's identified 5. There are tons of them. They're individually, they're bio-individual, and they can be that, sometimes they're very narrow, sometimes they're very broad, sometimes a combination of all of them. But, and that's why instead of love languages, sometimes I often say, I got to find a person's currency, and their currency is what matters to them. And then when you do that, you're able to go there. The love languages hits the concepts really well. And I like how it's always good to have a number. When you write a book, it's like the 5, have a number. It helps, But when you dive into these things, it's just you and I talked about with Walt last week or the week before about the emotional guidance scale, right. The one that they use in the law of attraction, where what does she talk about, 24 emotions or whatever? Well, that's just an example of what she came up with. Not what we're coming up with. My emotional guidance scale is much shorter than that. I don't need 24 steps in the guidance scale, but they're put there for that reason. Same thing with the 5 love languages. It's just there as sort of a guidepost. But when you really understand, what matters, I'm a big loyalty person. If once somebody's loyal to me and I'm loyal to them, that's forever. That's unbreakable. That doesn't, it doesn't change. But I'm very slow to get to that point where I'm trusting somebody. But when I do, it is unconditional forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And by the way, on the whole idea of the emotional guidance scale, my guidance scale has 2 places on it, better and worse. I'm aiming to feel better, or else I'm finding myself feeling worse. There aren't any other emotions in my scale. It's just I feel better or I feel worse. Simple. Because that's all my little brain can handle. I can't explain it in any other way. Somebody asked me, where are you on the scale right now? I actually I was working with a coach recently, and every time that we start a new session, she would bring out a list of like 165 different emotional states. And they're on this big color wheel and so forth. And she says, okay, which one are you at? And I'm saying, there's no way I'm going to study all those 165. I'll just tell you where I am right now. I'm feeling pretty good. Okay. You know,
Yeah,
you're not going to get a better answer out of me than that. It's just not going to work.
well, often we're looking at the concept, not the actual. And, you know, like Jenny mentioned a second ago, there's some things in the book that any book I've ever read, I don't agree with it, anything 100%. I'm always going to have something going on with that, just because my own spin on things. But I really do appreciate the context of understanding what makes you tick and me tick, and how we communicate, what matters to us. And I really, that is a great skill you can add to when you're networking or at work or in relationships. It's just what matters. And when I work with foster care kids, they've been through hell. They have and they're usually a train wreck by the time I get to them, so they're always in a really bad state. But I almost always know that their currency, what they're worth, their family, they've been taken from their family. So nobody's talking about that. So I talk about that. Everybody's like, well, you're acting crazy, or you're doing these things. Well, you've been literally taken from your family. So your response is that. So I talk to them about their family. And agree. I can't believe they took me from my mom. That was terrible. And I go, I know it is terrible. Now, the reason they took her, I took the child. Often I understand they had to, but it's still horrible for the kid. So I have to understand that kid's currency is he doesn't have his mom.
And Jen was referring to that earlier, weren't you, when you were talking about how your own love languages have changed over the years? I think it's probably fair to say that they change monthly, weekly, daily.
Totally. And I would throw out there that they even change whatever relationship you're referring to. My love language with my mom is different than my love language with my dad, is different than mine with my brother, or my very best friend, my lifelong best friend. I think that they are different. I think that's one of the things that kind of, I like the book and the concepts because it got me in a starting place of thinking about it. A lot of people just know when you say the love languages, they may not have read the book, but they understand the concepts.
Right.
And I think a lot of people think they're mutually exclusive. Like you're one and none of the others. But I would say it's not just limited to those 5. So I'm really glad that Joel said that. And also, I think that they can change and shift in their, percentages or whatever, depending on what relationship you're referring to in that moment. And even relationships shift over time. And so those might shift as well. We're constantly evolving. Our relationships are constantly evolving. And so it's natural that those would evolve as well.
And that's a great point, because the evolution of relationships is, as it grows, most married couples that are married a long time, and this is just in general, I'll use my mom and dad, for example. They're married, and you have the beginning stage. Everything's great. It's a physical relationship. Often there's a lot of sex, a lot of great stuff going on there with that. Then, as time goes on, I watched my mom and dad go from husband and wife to brother and sister. And nobody ever said that, but they ended up in separate rooms because my dad snored, but they loved each other equally, if not more, toward the end of their life. But the relationship had evolved greatly. So their language of love, what mattered early was certainly not mattering later. But my dad my mom unexpectedly died before my dad, and he never recovered. That was everything to him. And that relationship evolved over the years. I know several people that relationships evolve, and the languages of love that we express during that time evolves. Even with kids, like when my kids were real little, they really wanted a hug. Now, again, I'm not a big hugger, but when it's your kids, anytime they wanted a hug, they got a hug. And, you do that. Then when they hit puberty, they don't want anything to touch near you. They don't like you brush my arm, get away from me. They become very different. And then, like TJ, my oldest son, who, when he was little, he didn't like hugging at first, but then he would come give me a hug. Then again, through the, 13 through 16, Lord knows we never even touched arms in the car, and he'd have like, yeah, no. And then, after that, he would always instigate hugs, and he always would, Dad, love you, and stuff like that. He changed his language of love as time went on. So everything's always evolving in how you feel. I'm a much different person now. I think we all are. I'm a different person today than I was a year ago. I'm certainly a much different person today than I was 30 years ago. It's just whatever your growth is. So everything evolves. And so that Jenny's point of very much involved with that. I love that concept. Everything's evolving. So nothing's set in stone, and it can change, and it can, my love language, will change, and how I show love will change on often depending on, like, as I said, I'm not a big hugger, but if somebody needs a hug, they're going to get that. It's they need that. When I lost a client a few weeks ago, and he'd been doing really well. He was in Texas, and don't know the details yet, but he was unresponsive, and his mom met with me, and the woman, she couldn't have handled not having a hug. She had to have a hug. It was just necessary. And it was something that, but in no means did I find it wasn't hard to do. My energy could adapt, and she needed that hug. She needed that energy.
This brings in what I think is probably one of the most important pieces, which is that love languages. I mean, when you use the word language, you're talking about communication.
Sure.
And I think it's probably fair to say that despite the fact that everybody's in relationships of various kind, whether primary or otherwise, and a fair number of people really appreciate how important communication is within a relationship. I mean, the root of the word relationship is relate. So, I mean, it kind of has to be in there. And yet it's amazing to me to this day how often we kind of skip over the communication part of a relationship. I mean, Joel, you see that all the time, I'm sure, in your practice. I mean, that's just because you're dealing with various kinds of dysfunctionality. So you're bound to run into that quite often. But even just in everyday normal discourse with people, it becomes evident communication just kind of goes by the wayside.
Absolutely.
So I guess the question I'm going to ask each of you is, well, if that's true, then what does our knowledge of love languages do to help facilitate communication?
Wow. That's a good question. Jenny, you want to go first?
Well, the very first thing, this may not directly answer, but the first thing that popped into my head is the importance. I'm not a parent, but I would think the importance of having that conversation with your kids, because it's going to help them, number one, know themselves better, because you're kind of forcing the conversation, making them think about it. They may never have thought about it before, but also that's one way that you honor them. It just as you would anyone, but that's such an important relationship in how you honor them, and you want them to feel loved. So what is your love language? So that was one of the first things that just popped into my head as you were talking, but that doesn't directly answer the question, but that's what I've got right now.
That's all right. Okay. That's good.
Well, and I have, I have a scenario that takes place, I don't know, 10 times a week in my office. I'll be talking to, this is just a generic composite here, the 15-year-old kid that's doing 15-year-old kid stuff. You have mom who might be on the edge of helicopter bomb, and you have dad who's sick of it all. So they're all sitting in the room, and I can literally watch their body language. And so as soon as the mom starts talking, the kid does this, just ridiculous, and he's not hearing a word mom say. And then dad's getting mad because the kid's being so dramatic, and the mom then gets, nobody ever listens to me. And the dad says, you're overreacting. And you're watching this scene play out that plays out every single night in their house. And nobody needs to say anything. In fact, if I just said, just do the movements, take out the language, and you guys just do the movements, and it's so obvious that as soon as one starts talking, the other one, the mom's eyes will roll up to the left, like, okay, here we go again, and then dad will have a different perspective, and the mom and dad are mad at each other, and the kid's sort of thriving best when mom and dad are fighting, and I'm like, okay, so that plays out 10 times every week at least, and so what I have to start doing is changing the rehearsed behavior. They've been doing this for, let's say the kid's 15. Probably was, didn't happen, but probably about 6 or 7, So they've been doing this for 7 or 8 years. And, they have that same thing. And, mom's having a hard time accepting. Like one example was this kid's doing really well. A's and B's in school. He's on a sports team. He has a couple hobbies, and he has a part-time job on the weekend. In my world, that's checking a lot of. He's not doing any drugs. I mean, this is, but his room is a disaster. It is just disgusting. And here looks like just a big mop of stuff, just whatever. But, dad basically doesn't care. He's pleased with the results. Mom is really upset that the kid won't clean his room, but really mad because she's lost any control over the situation. And so I go through, when I try to go through the thing with honoring mom and saying, but can we look at what he's doing right? And she said, well, he's disrespectful to me. I said, well, what's he disrespectful for? Well, I asked him 6 times yesterday to clean his room, and he just says, Mom, leave me alone. That's disrespecting me. And I said, yes. But I said, can we look at the big picture? Can you tell me what he's doing right? And she has a really hard time ignoring the room and then saying, here's what he's doing right. I said, well, this week I've had 2 kids go to treatment. This week I have 1 kid in jail. And I go through, so if you're going to put him on a scale to those kids, where are we at? And finally, when I get mom to be able to uncouple from that, I'm not being responsible, then she could say, well, he is doing pretty well. And then once mom does that, and then I can go to the kid and say, look, your room sucks. It's terrible. Look at this nastiness, and I don't care if everything's off the floor, but you got bowls that are crusted with cereal from 3 months ago. You got to get rid of that crap. And the kid can, yeah. But once you get that going, but it takes somebody to be able to step away from that rehearsed language. And it helps to bring in, Mom, can you, I know it matters to you that the room's a mess. And I know the fact that he won't cut his hair really drives you crazy. So I get all that. But can you see that with everything he's doing well, you as a mom, what's your main goal for your son in life? And if I can get her to say it, I might have to tell her, the ultimate goal for any parent is to have their kids to be able to take care of themselves. That's the ultimate goal in my mind. However we get there, the parents might have a different view, but a kid to be able to take care of themselves, to be functioning and not end up in prison or on the dance pole, at the strip club. That's our ultimate goal. And once we get there, once I get her to see that, your son's really on the right trajectory to do all those things. And yes, the hair is annoying and the room's not great, but it's really not interfering at all with your primary mission as a mom. You're doing a great job, Mom. When she hears that, she can let back. And then the kid, and of course, Dad's just happy that, hey, I just want these people to shut up.
I hear so many themes going on right now, and it so often happens, Jen. I have trouble deciding what direction do I want.
I know, me too. Because that was just making me think, we're always communicating. We're always communicating. It could be verbal, nonverbal, but with the amount of communication that is out there, what's true communication is so lost in noise. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, also the noise itself is a form of communication.
It is.
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, Joel was creating kind of a generic scenario there, so it could apply to almost any of his clients. But I can kind of conceive of the idea that the kid has a
empty rehearsed dialogue.
Yeah. Well, I can kind of conceive though of that kid. One of the reasons why the kid's room is such a mess is that it does an effective job of keeping his mom and dad out. This could actually be a form of communication going on here.
That's brilliant.
That's what happens when you do a podcast long enough. You start getting all these different perspectives going on. Yeah. Driven in part, by the way, he mentioned that one of the goals that he has in mind for a kid is he wants the kid to be doing well in school. He wants the kid to, have his life going good. Basically moving in a direction that doesn't either have him in jail or on a sex pole.
Right.
And literally last week, I had a guest on who basically turned her life around by going to a sex poll. So again, perspective is everything.
It truly is. It truly is. And that could take me down a rabbit hole too. So I'm going to pick my spots here.
Okay. All right. That's cool. So pick a rabbit hole. Which one do you want to go down right now?
Well, I like what Joel was saying. I like his examples. It looks like we're losing him.
He's having some connection issues, but he'll
He's
get
having
connected
some
back
problems.
in. Yeah.
He'll come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's trying real hard.
I'm having troubles. I'm trying desperately, I promise.
Okay, well, you're
It's
back.
probably
That's
the cow that's trying to walk
the
in
cow,
here.
yeah. We'll just blame the cows. You do.
Yeah, our audience doesn't know about the cow.
No, they do not. No, but one thing that I also thought of, and going back to Joel's post on Facebook, it was very interesting to read through all of the comments in that thread. But I started thinking, a lot of people were asking Joel, what is your love language? And then I think there were some jokes, and I don't know who started it, but Joel's like, mine is not physical touch. And I think it's so interesting when somebody says what theirs is not, that's communication too. And so mine is not physical touch either, but I have people in my life that theirs is physical touch, and I'm not as nice as Joel, which like, okay, you need a hug, I'm gonna give you a hug. It's like, you did something great, and it's like, good job, you. I'm working on it. That's something I'm working on in myself, but I do think it's interesting when someone comes out and says, this is what I am not. That's communication too, and that's important communication.
It is. It's very important. I kind of wish I had known about the Love Languages book, or I should rephrase that. I knew about it. I had not read it. I had not really studied it. I wish I had studied it before my marriage fell apart, because I think one of the things that would have been a little bit different anyway is I would have realized that I was really missing one of my ex-wife's key love languages. I mean, I was missing it big time. I didn't realize that that's what it was. I mean, I knew it was there, but I kind of dismissed it as unimportant. I didn't realize it was important until I became more familiar with the book. So, I mean, there are a lot of different ways that being aware of the book and reading the book and learning from the book can affect you. But one of them is it can kind of make you do a double take and say, oh, what do I know about the love languages of the people that are important to me in my life?
And one of the things that I find is, I'll try to express this it's in my brain really nicely, but it's not finding a way out that makes sense, but we'll try. So in historical relationships I don't want to be controlled. I don't want to, I just simply, if I'm in a relationship, I want to be there. But if I'm being pressured to spend more time or something, then that just sets me it pushes me the other way. So sometimes the other person's need can, really have a reverse effect. And there's one relationship I was having she was very much in need of knowing where I was at all the time. And I'm very much in her not knowing where, not that I'm doing anything wrong, but I don't need to report. If we're in a relationship, you're going to trust, So we had a talk, and she said, I'm good with that. She said, I've been cheated on before. I said, look, I'm a lot of things. That one will not happen with me. I just don't have time. It's too much complicated. I don't have all that. It's just I have trouble with keeping up with this relationship, much less another one. So we're not going to add another. And so we had a really good, it was really going well one night. And so I was living in South Carolina at the time, and I was running this addiction treatment clinic. And there's a little house behind the treatment center. This will make sense in a little while. And I had another house. I had a condo about 20 minutes away. It was on a lake. It was beautiful. And so I had an intake that came in real late, about 1 a.m. on a Friday night into Saturday morning. So when I got there, I got the person settled, and I said, this is before I had kids. So I was like, I'll just sleep in the little back house. And then since I had to be at the place in the morning anyway, why would I drive the 20 minutes? And, it made sense. So I fall asleep, and I just am awakened with her calling. And she goes, "Where are you?" I'm at home. I mean, I just woke. She goes, "No, you're not. I'm in your driveway." Yelling, and I'm going, well, I'm like, well, and I just woke up. I go, well, I'm at the house in Rock Hill, and then I found myself explaining. I said, wait a minute, you're in my driveway at 7 a.m. What are you? She said, I just drove by to see where you're at. And I'm like, and I'm trying to figure all this out. And the reality, it turns out for me, the reality was that was our last day as a couple, because it was this. It really, because I just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was that bad, because she was furious. It was the first time she ever like yelled and cussed, and I was just like, whoa, this is. So I've never been able to have a relationship if it's going to be, where are you at, what are you doing? She was the one. She said, we only spent 17 hours together last week. And I go, what? That's a lot of time. And
Perspective is everything.
Yeah. Yeah, she said, well, you're at the gym more than that. And I go, oh, yeah. Of course. That's a no-brainer.
So what we're bringing out here is the fact that one of the reasons you want to understand the love languages is that along with the love languages, you get the data that tells you about the person and how you relate to that person and how that person relates to you. I mean, that's what language is all about, exchanging information. Well, you get information through the love languages.
Well, and the love language can also be, and again, expanding the concept more than the 5 love, to her, security and knowing where her partner is all the time. That she was very codependent in that. So, but that was important to her. Well, that actually, sometimes the love languages can battle each other and actually make a really bad fit. Yeah. It's like, if I just can't, I would never be able to maintain a relationship where I would check again. I'm capable of waking up tomorrow and Justin and I flying to New York and seeing a baseball game. Of course, we would never do that, Walt, but you get the point.
I was about to fall off my chair when you said that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
If you had said football game, I would have said, oh, yeah, ho-hum, big deal. But no, you said baseball game.
Yeah. Yeah, I was doing that for your benefit.
I thought you had a moment there or something. Okay.
No, of course not. But I like to be spontaneous, and I don't, you can't do that when someone says, well, what do you mean you're in New York City? You didn't tell me you were going to New York City. I don't have to. I go to New York City. So the language can have it helps when you're finding somebody, because if that's somebody's language where they're just in constant need of reinforcement of then that's not going to be my partner. That's going to be, I need somebody who's going to accept, look, this guy is all over the place, but he's not cheating. As I said, I can imagine the complicatedness of any relationship for me has always been just bizarre. Then you add me cheating, just be so confused all the time. It wouldn't work.
I think there are many of us, regardless of our own particular orientation, we'd be confused too. That would be a tough one.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a key reason too, by the way. There's something really important here, because as much as we're talking about relationship and communication, like I mentioned before, humans do have this tendency to not communicate, which is kind of an odd thing, but we do. In relationships of all kinds, we have a tendency not to communicate. And as a result, one of the byproducts of that is very often things happen and we don't know why. They don't make any sense because we lack certain pieces of data, and the data are lacking because for whatever reason they weren't communicated. Mm-hmm. So part of this whole thing about love languages, I think, is also about how do you deal with the fact that sometimes people don't use the language to communicate.
Mm-hmm. That's a huge question, because I often can be very confused, as you use the word confused. I don't mind blunt at all. I'm very blunt. I love blunt. Just tell me this point.
It works in our relationship, by the way. I just wanted to mention that. That's one of the reasons we do this show for so long.
Yeah, no, it works. And I've had friends, sometimes of the opposite sex, where we were good friends, but it would get to a weird point, and I never could. And so I just was like, okay, I would find myself trying to fill in the blank of, okay, what happened here? And if I tried to ask, well, no, nothing. And it wasn't a relationship, it was just friends. And I have friends, all different walks of life, male, female. I have 10-year-old friends. I have 90-year-old friends. I got all kind of friends. And, the idea that sometimes I just don't understand what the other person's thinking, and they don't have the ability to share what they're thinking. And so it just somehow it can get very awkward sometimes for me. I just have to at some point just say, I just don't know what to do with this because I don't understand it. And a lot of people just, I would rather have the discussion. I would rather say, look, this just got weird. Why did it get weird? Let's do that. Let's talk about it. But that person, like, no, we're fine. It's like, okay. So I never, communicating, I've always been of belief, just put it out there. Let's talk about it. It doesn't hurt. I've never been, it might be uncomfortable to talk about something, but not knowing to me is far more complicated.
Totally agree.
Far more complicated.
Yeah. And by the way, it's a great opportunity to blow things out of proportion. Because if you don't have data, you start filling in the data. That's one thing the human mind is really good at, filling in data that doesn't exist.
Yes. Well, it fills in data based on historical stuff that has happened before, often traumatic historical stuff. So you fill it in with the worst case scenario. So yes. I went out with this young lady one night, and this is I'm just saying, you go out with somebody one night, this isn't a true story, and I thought it went great, and then I text her the next morning, she doesn't answer. And then I'm going to fill in the blank with everything that went wrong,
Right. Yeah.
When you're like, well, this happened, and it's just, you're like, and I'm going to use all negative information to get there. And then, if she says, oh my goodness, I left my phone in the car last night, I didn't see your text, I'm sorry, whatever, then it's like, oh, okay. But for that hour, that 5 hours or whatever, I'm just totally convinced that I'm already mad that she didn't answer me and trying to figure out what went wrong. And none of it was true. The brain is a predicting machine. It's just its job. It's protective. It takes information to fill in the blank. I've talked about this a lot, but I use pictures of these, like, they're therapeutic pictures. It'll be like a lady looking over a field. And I'll ask somebody, what does this look like? And tell me what this lady's thinking. And, you'll hear, she lost her husband and she's very sad. Well, likely the person telling me that lost her husband and she's very sad, or the kid that was taken in foster care. That's a mom looking for her kids that were taken from her. So they're going to use events as they know them to fill in the blank. And if you don't have exact information, all you have to fill in the blank is your own experience. And the strongest of those experiences are pain, trauma, or whatever you're looking for it. It's like I grew up with a bunch of addiction, a bunch of mental illness. So I was always filtering for, well, tonight, who's coming in, what craziness is about to come through tonight. And I can remember one of the things that my grandfather, we lived with him. He was a horrible alcoholic. He'd go to bed early, and he was very mean. He'd go to bed early, like 8 o'clock at night. And he snored really loud. So the first time I would hear him snore, I was like, oh, thank God. He's done for the night. He's not going to terrorize us until tomorrow. And I mean, I'm like 6, trying to figure that out. It's like, so the brain fills in based on that. So, later in life, and this never happened to me, but if I hear somebody snore, I could easily say, oh, there could be there'd be a connection to that sound.
Association, yes.
Yeah, the association when the morning that I got the call that my son passed away, the ringtone on my phone, it was 6 a.m. The phone rang. I used to keep my ringtone on at night. That was the last night I ever did that. And I changed my ringtone because that ringtone, every time I hear it, it triggers me to this day. It triggers me. And my phone is on silent all the time anyway, but if I'm out in public and somebody has that ringtone, so I'm filling in the blank based on my most traumatic event of all times. And the brain is a predictor using information we have from our own library.
I love the fact that you say that because, first of all, you actually clarified something for me. I realize now why it is that whenever I've been ghosted by somebody I've been seeing, the first first thing that comes to my mind is not that she got abducted by aliens, because it's not part of my experience. So thank you. You clarified that point for me.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Just saying.
But I think it's so important. I think it's so important to have that self-awareness to know when your brain is doing that, filling in the dots where there really isn't any information. And then it takes, that ability, whether you're in the presence with that person or not, to initiate a conversation that says, why did this happen? Or how are you feeling in this moment, or whatever? Like, I'm like Joel. I would rather have a direct conversation and ask questions to try to understand where the other person is coming from. And I can respond to that with how I'm feeling and how it makes me feel. So I think the first step, though, is to be able to be self-aware enough to know that you are doing that. You are filling in these blanks in that way.
Well, that raises an interesting question. How often are we that self-aware? How many of us can actually say we're self-aware in a conscious way on that exact point?
I'm working on it.
Well, but I think that you can't turn that off all the way. That's part of the mechanism. That's part of the function of the brain, is to fill in the blanks. I mean, when you're walking in the woods, Jenny goes on a lot of walks. I mean, a lot of hikes. And there's this weird stick there. And for a second, it might look like a snake. The body's responding to the snake. You know what I mean? It's not a snake, but you're filling in the blank. What your subconscious brain gets right to the fact, you bypass logic and you go, there's a snake. And then you laugh at yourself because it was a stick, but you keep walking. So there's a protective mechanism to the filling in the blank. The brain can't accept knowing. So it's going to fill it in forever. But you're right, to Jenny's point, being aware of, and your point, Walt, when you realize, especially when it comes to dating has become so complicated in today's world. It's just so different. Everybody thinks it's easier, and it's so bizarre now. It's I deal with my clients all the time, these apps and all this drama, and it's gotten so much more complicated, even though it's easier to find people, but it has not made it any better. Made it much more complicated. But the filling in the blank concept is, in dating, you're going to take every relationship you've ever had, and often the worst parts of it, and you're going to look at that person, any activity that person has that reminds you of that, you're going to use that old information. That's just there. And it's you can't turn it off, but to be aware of it is really important. Then you can maybe filter it on to some degree, but you can't turn it off. It's just the brain is a predicting machine. That's what it does. It will always predict, and it wants to know what it is. It can't accept not knowing, and if it doesn't know, it just will tell you, here's what I think it is. Let's go with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess then the next step for me is, now that we know that that's going on, that the brain is always doing that's part of its job, that's part of the survival mechanism, that it's not going to go away. Now it becomes a question of coping with it. How do you cope with it? And that's going to be a different answer for every person. But you've got a client sitting across the desk from you, Joel, and they're asking you that question. How do you answer the question? How do they begin to cope with that?
Once they identify it, then how is it affecting the situation? You start naming. Okay, I went out this woman, and she ghosted me, or thought she ghosted me. Then 2 days later, she texted me out and she's playing games. And I always like to say, okay, so first of all, why did that come up? What have you had that happen to you before? Yes, I have, multiple times. So you're filling in the blank. Identify the origins of where you filled it in before, and it may be applicable. It may apply, but also give the benefit of the doubt that it doesn't have to be that way every time. Do you remember John Benet Ramsey?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, little girl was kidnapped from her home, I believe in Denver, somewhere in Colorado, maybe out that way. And in my mind, I automatically just knew the parents did it. Just not only because I had no information whatsoever. It's just it's always the parent. It's never, the story didn't match. It's always the parents. It's just you there. And we still don't really know, I don't think, but it could be, but I filled in the blank. But that's relevant. Then to this other girl, she was kidnapped from a Mormon family. I'm forgetting her name, but she was kidnapped. And I did the exact same thing. I said the family did it. That, she's missing, family did it, filled in the blank. Well, like 2 years later, she's found with this crazy guy. He'd been kidnapped and brainwashed her and had put her through some horrible stuff, but she was alive. And my assumption, just because every time before one of those stories came up, yeah, the parents did it. It's one of those things. So we make the assumptions. In this one case, the parents were never, they didn't, their lives were basically ruined because the police kept saying, yeah, you did it. Where is she? Just tell her where. And they're like, we really didn't. And then it turns out they didn't. But that, again, based on that. So, that was an example for me that I don't need to jump to conclusions. So when I know I need to really be aware that there's going to be cases that aren't always that way. And when I sit down with clients, I try to tell them, just because it's been that way for it isn't this time. So being able to identify where that prediction is based, it will help you get to a place to not necessarily honor that prediction. You're aware that it's there, but you don't have to give it much credibility just because this happened before doesn't mean it's going to happen again. That's why I got to that. So it does help to know it, and you also don't have to give it weight or as much weight.
That makes sense. In fact, you're reminding me of something that I had never really given thought to, but I know it's true within my own life. I've actually learned a lot about how to do that exact behavior that you're talking about there, that, paying attention to my own patterns and so forth through my enjoyment of mystery novels. And the reason I say that is it's almost a cliche. The butler always did it. If you're not really sure the butler did it, I have to honestly tell you, I have read hundreds of mystery novels. The butler has never done it once. Not even once.
Wow.
And when I look at that, I say to myself, well, then I can't just buy into something that seems to be obvious on the surface because clearly the data doesn't support that.
Right. The butler didn't do it.
The butler. If I ever read a novel where the butler did it, I'm going to fall off the chair.
That should be your novel. You should write. Just make it. Yeah.
We'll just call it The Butler Did It.
Well, the butler didn't actually make him do it. I mean, well, he didn't lie. The title didn't lie. The butler did it.
But I like what Joel said and not giving weight to those things. And I think sometimes it takes people, those important key people in our lives, to help us identify things that maybe we don't see. And I'll use my mom as an example. I don't think she'll care that I use this as an example, but we live very close. Our houses are very close to one another. And every time she would hear sirens in the area, she would text me and say, "Are you okay?" And so at first I would just respond, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then we moved beyond that to where I use humor a lot. I believe in using humor. And so, yes. So I would beat her to it. I would hear sirens and I'd be like, "Hey Mom, just wanted to let you know I'm fine." And so we kind of moved to that. But then that led to us having a serious conversation one day that's like, listen, what is it about hearing sirens that makes you need to check on me? And let's talk about that. And what if I'm busy? What if I'm out mowing the yard and you hear sirens and you're waiting on me to respond back and I didn't? And that's going to send you into a tailspin. So just having that conversation, I don't think she ever really consciously recognized that when she hears sirens, she's worried about me and she wants to make sure I'm okay and she's reaching out. So it took having that conversation. Now we laugh about it, but she hears sirens a lot and doesn't text me. So I think sometimes it takes that person in your life who you love and trust to just kind of walk you through that a little bit and use humor too.
Yeah. Humor is always awesome. I have a similar story. When I would visit my mom, one time in particular, I visited my mom with my sons, TJ and Chris, and they were 13 and 10 or something like that. And obviously at that point in my life, I'd been through a whole lot. So, Mom, they had plenty of room. So me and the boys went to Malibu Grand Prix in Tampa to drive some go-karts, and we went and had some ice cream. And TJ said, hey, can we go see the movie, which is right by the Malibu Grand Prix? And I looked at the clock, and it was like 10 o'clock. Mom and Dad are usually in bed at 10, right? So I didn't want to call her. I just said, yeah, we'll go see the movie. So we go see whatever movie, and it was like a 2.5-hour movie. So by the time we get home, it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning. And my mom's sitting up. She goes, I've been worried sick. I go, why? And she said, well, you didn't call. I said, well, I didn't want to wake you up. You should have called me, though. That would have helped. And she said, well, I didn't know what was going on. And I go, I said, every day of the year when I'm living out, at the time I was living in South Carolina, every day of the year that I'm in South Carolina, you have no idea what's going on. And we often go to the movies and we do crazy stuff. We might not be home till 2 a.m. sometimes. And she goes, I know, but when you're here, it's different. I said, you have my word. One or two things. Eventually, I just had to start getting a hotel because she was driving me crazy. But I said, if we're going to be out late, I'll let you know. So I did tell her we're going to probably be home about 10:30. And, she did at the time, and the texting she wouldn't even understand what a text coming through would look like. So I just assumed she was in bed. I should have called her, but that was my mistake. And I apologize for doing that. But it was this idea in her mind that, he said he'd be home at 10:30. I'm worried about it. We navigate the world every day. I mean, I've been through so much of my life at that point, turned my life around. But in her mind, that was just, she was a nervous wreck. She rocked in her chair for 3 hours waiting for us to get home. And, of course, my dad is zonked out saying they're fine. They're good.
This is a funny story, but there's a serious side to this, and it raises a really interesting question that I'd love to have you address, Joel, which is, what's the difference between learning a love language and learning a codependency language?
Well, I think they can be intermingled often. The codependency is a language that gets so by definition is a mesh with love, and so it is a seeming love language or a side part of a love language where the need to other people's happiness is it so much more important than your happiness, or your well-being is built on another person being happy, all that stuff that goes along with codependency. I think we did a show on, and if we haven't, we need to, a book of Codependent No More with Melody Beatty. I don't know if we ever did that. It's a wonderful book. And it talks about codependency, and it doesn't use this language of love, but she talks about the language of codependency. And it's very much, codependency has its own words often. I can't, unless my kid is happy, I can't be happy unless this is, this idea that that somebody else has to be happy, and my happiness is based on that. It is a horrible way to live. And if your kid has addiction issues, it can be deadly to have that language.
So I have to follow up with another question then. If there's such an overlap between codependency languages and love languages, and if as a general rule of thumb, we want to avoid trying to in some way empower codependency or I forget what the word is, but there's a particular word in therapeutic circles that describes how you feed into codependency, whatever that word is. But if we're trying to avoid that, how do we express love to somebody who's looking for a codependent response?
Well, codependency is a form of addiction. So in a lot of ways, both parties can become addicted to codependency. So it doesn't just usually wake up and we're codependent. It's built over a period of time. So you have to slowly change the dialogue. So here's an example. I have a mom. Her son was a severe heroin addict, severe. And for those that know, going through heroin withdrawal is brutal. And you get very sick, and it's a horrible thing. And there are drugs that can help with that. But this this guy took his drugs all at once trying to get high, and he didn't have any, so they weren't going to give me any more. And so it was a Friday night, and this is upper middle class mom, and on what we call the west end of Richmond area, so it's the nicer part of town. And he's telling his mom that he was on house arrest, so he had an ankle, but he couldn't leave. He goes, "Mom, I got to have some heroin or I'm going to die." And he just sat there and shaked and cried. And so mom goes to the ATM, goes to the worst part of town in her Mercedes, and buys her son. He was hurting so bad. And you understand what she's trying to do. I understand that. But she put her life at danger. She prolonged her son's addiction. One of the most effective ways, again, not getting into the whole thing, I don't want to start a debate, but, when you go through a brutal heroin withdrawal, that's a good, maybe I don't want to do that again. Sometimes that could be helpful in not doing it anymore. And with a heroin withdrawal, different than benzodiazepine or alcohol, you cannot die from a heroin withdrawal. You wish you were dead, but you will not die. It really sucks, but this mom would fall for that. And so so this went on for a few weeks. Mom, sitting at home, would go and buy heroin from this dealer I can't describe how bad this part of town is, and just thought that was a way to help her son. And fortunately, a friend found out about it. We were able to break that cycle, and the son's doing fine, mom's doing fine. But that codependent cycle came up. There was no harm intended by mom. She wanted to relieve the suffering of her son, not knowing the suffering was, the relief wasn't in the heroin. The relief is the ability to stop using. But it's a hard thing to implement when you have your own child in a lot of pain. So you see that it develops, and once you wake up codependent, and like I say, you don't wake up that way, but it builds. But you realize it's really hard to stop. It's very hard to pull away. I mean, people that have been in, relationships, and it's really, hey, I gotta step back from this, and it's really hard because the other person is usually kicking and screaming, and it's really hard to watch somebody you love suffer.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that when you're trying to avoid feeding into a codependent need and wanting to replace it with a true expression of a love language, that it's probably important to understand when it is that the need being expressed is a codependent need? Because that probably is a big deal right there. That's something that probably gets skipped a lot.
Oh, it does. Well, in my case, when I was going through my addiction and my recovery, I had a gambling addiction, and I had this thing I could do with my parents. I would never ask them for money. That would be ridiculous. But what I would do is I would go visit over their house, and I'd sit down at the table and, act depressed. And then mom would go, "Son, what's wrong with you?" I go, Nothing, I'm fine. And I would make her ask me what's going on. I'm like, I said, I haven't gambled in 6 months, which is a lie. I gambled about 25 minutes before I got there. But I haven't gambled in 6 months. And I found out today, I just thought I was over the hump. I've gotten a lot of people paid back, but the IRS now needs $6,000. And, they told me that it's fraudulent, and if I don't pay it immediately, I'm going to go to jail. I probably will be better off just going to jail. I would say that. And then my dad, I could see on the record, my dad would nod to my mom, and my mom would reach down to the purse where the checkbook is and pull out the checkbook. Why she would write a check to me for $6,000 after me stealing over $1 million from, I'll never know. But she somehow thought that was, she was really trying to help. Never once did she say, "Why don't I write it to the IRS itself?" By the way, the IRS didn't need anybody. They weren't involved. But it was just this idea. And I would do that. And then the moment I saw the checkbook, I had to work really hard to continue to be, thank you, because I knew it's 4 p.m. The bank doesn't close to 6, and I got to get there to cash the check so I can get to the track by 7 to make my bets. And that was their codependency in not seeing me suffer. And my taking advantage of them not seeing me suffer. I knew that, and that cycle repeated multiple times until the point that I actually ended up in jail from stealing from somebody else other than my family. And I said, hey, Dad, if you could pay this, I won't have a felony charge. That was a true statement because I'm calling from jail. The judge says if you can get this paid off before tomorrow, if your parents just might pay it off, we'll just dismiss the charges. And my dad at that point said, well, son, we tried that before. Let's see what a felony will do for you. That wasn't exciting, but believe it or not, I don't have the life I have today if he didn't do that. And it changed everything. And to be fair, I literally hated him for about 6 months. He had plenty of money and that little bit of money in my mind, but I later told him that I probably would have died from my addiction if he didn't do that. And everything I have today, my boys have a dad because my dad finally had the courage to stop enabling my pathetic little addicted self, and it changed everything. And I went to jail. I did 30 days in jail. That wasn't pleasant. And I not able to get a job being a convicted felon for a long time. I had to go through all of that, but it was all necessary. I wouldn't change a thing. On any of those positions whatsoever, everything that needed to happen there. So codependent sometimes keep people from reaching their ultimate self. I wouldn't be me today until I had to build myself up from nothing after that.
Yeah.
Jen, one of the things that happens often on this program is how, especially in the conversations I had with Joel, how they go off in all kinds of different directions. Now, you came onto the show. You know what the original topic was. You know what we were talking about. You saw how it veered off into this other direction. I got to ask you, what's your take on this right now?
Hey, I'm a long-time listener. Yeah, I'm used to it. I expected this. I'm a long-time listener, so I'm just here for it, wherever it goes.
That's pretty much how we are too.
Yeah,
good to hear that though.
Yeah. I mean, I realize sometimes I'm listening. I'll start thinking and go, "Wow, how do we even get there? It's just so far away." But it's just the one thing you don't have to be. You should be grateful. You're getting just a little taste. You have no idea what's going inside of my brain. If you saw that,
I actually did think about I thought about trying to map your brain one time, but I realized my database wasn't big enough. So I kind of gave up on the idea.
I have this thing, and I love my brain. It's one of my greatest gifts, but sometimes I will literally say to myself, God, you're exhausting. And just can we just sit down and watch a football game like other normal people your age?
See, now, I know, Jen, that was a true statement because he referred to a football game. That's how I know. That was a true statement. So that was a true love language coming out there.
Yes.
The other day, I had the laptop, and I was researching glucose disposal agents and looking up neuroscience effects of whatever I was looking up while watching a football game. I'm thinking, just it's a gift, but it just never shuts down, ever.
I have to tell you, Joel, you are the gift that keeps on giving, and I am so appreciative of that. And one of the greatest gifts you gave was to bring Jen to the show today.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm really pleased to find out you've been listening. I don't even know how you even survived all these years listening to us, but it's a great thing all by itself. But no, seriously, I love the contributions that you made. Thank you for joining us. It's been really great.
Thank you for having me on. This has been a blast.
We need to do this regularly. I would love to have you back on. You're great at developing topics, and our conversations often get very we kid a lot, and we talk a lot about food. So to be fair, chocolate usually.
Yes.
Chocolate usually enters the conversation at some point.
Yes.
Almost always. And so I have sort of, in a bad way, I'm a bad influence because I'm always having to try. Like, I'm the one that introduced Krispy Kreme donuts topped with Nutella.
First of all, he's the one that introduced me to Nutella.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yes.
it's nice to have somebody to blame for that, don't you think?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It makes it
It's
very
ridiculous.
simple.
But I always enjoy our interactions. And Walt, of course, I love doing the show. So this has been very fun tonight. Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you both too. Thank you.
And by the way, keep coming up with the ideas, because I mean that's how we have you back, right? That's
You're
how we
gonna
say,
be
okay, well, let's
sorry.
bring Jen back.
You might be sorry.
I don't think
She's
I've ever
great
been
at that.
sorry.
She's great at that. And one thing you can rest assured, no matter what topic you come up with, we will be nowhere near it by the end of the show.
That's what makes Rabbit Hole so fun.
Yes.
Yes.
You
Yes.
never know where they're going to take you. Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, seriously, this is a lot of fun. So we look forward to bringing you back again sometime. So thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.